Communication in difficult situations. I want to share with you the critical skills needed to navigate challenging communications in the workplace, particularly when dealing with cross communications and emotionally charged interactions. This module on communication in difficult situations is designed to help you understand the nuances of how misunderstandings occur and how you can manage them effectively. By mastering these skills, you can improve your ability to communicate clearly, reduce conflicts, and maintain positive relationships with colleagues and superiors. Cross communications. Cross communications occur when there is a mismatch between what one person is saying and what the other person is hearing or interpreting. This often happens due to differences in perception, intonation, or vocabulary. For example, one person may be speaking about a task, but the listener might interpret the communication based on body language or a different context, leading to misunderstandings. Understanding cross communications is crucial because they are common in the workplace and can lead to significant misunderstandings if not addressed properly. By recognizing the potential for cross communications, you can take steps to clarify your messages and ensure that both parties are on the same page. Failing to manage cross communications can result in confusion, missed deadlines, and strained relationships. Subconscious pattern mismatches. Subconscious pattern mismatches are another source of communication challenges. These occur when the natural tendencies and cognitive styles of two individuals differ significantly. For example, one person might be proactive and focused on options, while another might be reactive and focused on procedures. These differences can create misunderstandings in how tasks are communicated and executed. Recognizing subconscious pattern mismatches is essential for improving communication and collaboration. By understanding your own patterns and those of your colleagues, you can adjust your communication style to better align with others, reducing the likelihood of misunderstandings. Ignoring these mismatches can lead to ongoing communication issues, where each party feels misunderstood or unsupported, ultimately affecting team dynamics and productivity. Intonations in communication. Intonations play a significant role in how messages are received. The stress placed on certain words in a sentence can completely change the meaning or perceived urgency of a communication. For instance, stressing the word need in a sentence like, "I need this report done by Monday," conveys a different urgency than stressing Monday. Understanding the impact of intonations is critical because it helps you interpret the true meaning behind words and respond appropriately. Being aware of how intonations influence communication allows you to ask better questions and clarify expectations. Failing to recognize the nuances of intonation can lead to misinterpretations, where the importance or intent of a message is misunderstood, potentially causing delays or errors in task completion. Vocabulary and clarity. The choice of words and the clarity of expression are vital in ensuring that your communication is understood as intended. Using specific and clear language helps prevent cross communications and ensures that your requests are interpreted correctly. For example, a more detailed request, such as, "I need this report to include specific sales forecasts by Monday," is clearer and more actionable than a vague request. Improving your vocabulary and clarity in communication is important for conveying your intentions accurately and efficiently. Clear communication fosters cooperation and ensures that tasks are completed as expected. On the other hand, vague or unclear communication can lead to confusion, errors, and frustration among team members, diminishing overall productivity. Mixing emotions and objectivity. Emotions can heavily influence communication, especially in stressful situations. Mixing emotions with objective tasks can lead to misunderstandings, where the emotional state of one person affects the clarity and effectiveness of communication. For example, if a boss requests a report with irritation, the emotional tone may cause the recipient to feel anxious or hesitant to ask clarifying questions. Understanding when to separate emotions from objective communication is crucial for maintaining clarity and professionalism. By managing your emotional responses and focusing on the objective aspects of communication, you can ensure that the message is clear and actionable. Failing to separate emotions from objective communication can escalate tensions, lead to miscommunication and hinder effective collaboration. Cultural considerations in communication. Cultural differences can also play a significant role in how communication is perceived and responded to. Different cultures have unique approaches to handling emotional overlaps in communication, and what is considered appropriate in one culture may not be in another. For example, Indian workplace culture often involves evaluating conversations with an emotional lens, which can lead to more dramatic interactions. Understanding cultural considerations in communication is essential for working effectively in diverse teams or international environments. By being aware of cultural differences, you can adjust your communication style to ensure that it is respectful and effective across different cultural contexts. Ignoring these differences can lead to miscommunication, cultural misunderstandings, and difficulties in building strong working relationships. This module emphasizes the importance of understanding and managing communication in difficult situations, providing insights into how cross-communications, subconscious patterns, intonations, vocabulary, emotions, and cultural considerations can impact your interactions in the workplace.
Understanding cross-communication. Isn't it interesting how two people can have a conversation and walk away with completely different interpretations? I've seen this happen countless times. One person thinks they were crystal clear, while the other is left confused, even frustrated. It's not always about what is said, but how it is heard. Could it be that we're all filtering conversations through our own perspectives, emotions, and subconscious patterns without realizing it? I've noticed that when conversations go sideways, it's often because one person is speaking from a logical, task-focused mindset, while the other is responding emotionally. It's like trying to tune into the same radio station but using different frequencies. Things just don't sync. I've often wondered what makes some conversations effortless while others feel like a battle. From what I've seen, a big part of it comes down to communication styles and personal tendencies. Some people thrive on big picture thinking, while others need every detail spelled out. Some focus on facts and tasks, while others are more attuned to emotions and relationships. When these styles clash, it's easy to mistake a difference in approach for a difference in intention. But could it be that difficult conversations aren't actually difficult, just mismatched expectations playing out in real time? Something as simple as how a sentence is spoken can shift the entire meaning of a request. I've watched people react completely differently to the same words just because of slight changes in tone or emphasis. If someone says, "I need this report by Monday," it sounds like they're frustrated. But if they say, "I need this report by Monday," it just signals urgency. Have you ever had a moment where someone misinterpreted what you meant just because of tone? It makes me wonder, how much tension could be avoided if people were more aware of this subtle but powerful aspect of communication? Then there's the challenge of vague versus precise language. I've seen conversations get stuck simply because one person assumes the other understands what they mean, when in reality, they don't. Saying, "Can you handle this quickly?" leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Does quickly mean in an hour by the end of the day or just sooner rather than later? But saying, "Can you send this over by 3 p.m.?" eliminates the guesswork. Could it be that many so-called difficult conversations are actually just unclear ones? And what about the emotional energy behind words? I've noticed how much body language, facial expressions, and even pauses in speech can shape the way a message is received. A request made with a tense posture and clipped tone feels completely different from the same request made in a relaxed, open manner. How often do people assume someone is being difficult when in reality, they're just reacting to the energy behind the words? It makes me wonder, how much of what we think is miscommunication is actually just a response to unspoken cues? At the heart of it all, I've come to realize that communication isn't just about what we say, but about how we are being heard. Could it be that the key to better conversations isn't about getting better at explaining, but about getting better at understanding? What if, instead of assuming someone is being difficult, we got curious? What if we asked, what are they really hearing when I speak? Maybe the secret to better communication isn't about having the perfect response, but about learning to listen in a whole new way. The role of subconscious patterns. Have you ever had a conversation that felt frustrating, not because of what was said, but because of how it was understood? I've noticed that some people seem to speak the same language effortlessly, while others constantly misinterpret each other. Could it be that communication isn't just about words, but also about how our subconscious patterns shape the way we process information? I've seen situations where two people believe they're talking about the same thing, but one is focused on what needs to be done, while the other is preoccupied with what could go wrong. Neither is wrong, it's just a different way of thinking. But when these patterns clash, communication starts feeling more like an uphill battle than a productive exchange. It gets even more interesting when you look at how people make decisions. Some naturally prefer to consider all possibilities, while others rely on structured procedures to feel secure in their choices. If someone who thrives on options works with someone who prefers a clear step-by-step process, the disconnect can be frustrating for both. Have you ever been in a situation where you're brainstorming ideas, but the person next to you just wants to lock in a decision and move forward? Or maybe you felt the opposite, ready to take action, but someone keeps throwing in more variables to consider. Could it be that so many workplace frustrations aren't personal at all, but simply differences in how people think? I've also noticed how much our focus of attention impacts communication. Some people naturally process things internally, relying on their own logic, instincts, and personal experiences, while others look outward, seeking validation, feedback, or consensus before making a decision. Neither approach is better, but when these two types interact, tension can arise. One may see the other as too independent and resistant to feedback, while the other feels like they're being held back by unnecessary approval seeking. It makes me wonder, how much smoother could interactions be if we recognize that people aren't being difficult, they're just wired differently? Even the way we break down information plays a role. Some people think in broad concepts. They love strategy, vision, and big picture thinking. Others focus on details, small steps, accuracy, and concrete execution. When these perspectives clash, it can feel like two people are having completely different conversations. One person says, "We need to improve our process," thinking about long-term strategy, while the other asks, "What specifically needs to change?" Because they need a clear, immediate step. Have you ever felt like someone wasn't getting it, only to realize later that they were just thinking on a different level? What if, instead of feeling frustrated, we simply asked, "Are we talking big picture or details?" Then there's the contrast between proactive and reactive mindsets. Some people are go-getters. They take initiative, make quick decisions, and prefer to act now rather than wait. Others are deliberate responders. They observe, gather information, and carefully assess before moving forward. I've seen countless moments where one person feels like another is dragging their feet, while the other feels rushed and pressured. But what if these differences are actually strengths? Could it be that proactive thinkers push things forward, while reactive thinkers prevent unnecessary mistakes? Maybe the frustration comes not from the difference itself, but from the expectation that others should think the way we do. The more I explore subconscious patterns, the more I realize that communication struggles aren't problems to fix. They're differences to understand. What if, instead of assuming someone is being difficult, we asked, how do they naturally process information? Could it be that recognizing these patterns in ourselves and others is the key to reducing conflict, increasing collaboration, and making conversations feel effortless? Maybe real communication isn't just about saying the right words. It's about understanding the mind of the person hearing them. How communication styles influence perception. Isn't it fascinating how two people can hear the same words but walk away with completely different interpretations? I've noticed that it's not just what we say, but how it's received that shapes communication. Could it be that every conversation is actually two conversations, one in the mind of the speaker and another in the mind of the listener? I've seen situations where someone believes they're being clear and direct, but the other person perceives them as rude or aggressive. At the same time, someone who values politeness and diplomacy may come across as indecisive or unclear to someone who just wants the facts. It makes me wonder, how often do we judge people based on communication style rather than intent? One of the biggest influences on perception is tone and emphasis. The same sentence can land in completely different ways depending on how it's said. If someone says, "I need this report by Monday," the emphasis suggests there's been a misunderstanding or a mistake. But if they say, "I need this report by Monday," it sounds more like an urgent deadline. I've seen people react defensively in conversations, not because of what was actually said, but because of how they perceived the energy behind it. Could it be that misunderstandings aren't about words at all, but about the subtle emotional cues that come with them? Another thing that fascinates me is how direct versus indirect communication shapes interactions. Some people believe in stating things as they are, focusing on efficiency and clarity. Others communicate in a more nuanced way, hinting at things rather than saying them outright. Neither approach is wrong, but when these styles collide, misinterpretations are bound to happen. I've seen direct communicators get frustrated because they think someone is beating around the bush, while indirect communicators feel like the other person is being too blunt. Could it be that people aren't necessarily difficult? They're just expressing themselves in a way that makes sense to them? And then there's the way people handle positive and negative feedback. Some thrive on straightforward criticism. They see it as valuable input to improve. Others need a softer approach, where feedback is balanced with encouragement. Have you ever given someone constructive criticism only to have them shut down or take it personally? Or maybe you've been on the receiving end, wondering why someone didn't just tell you what needed to change instead of sugarcoating it? It makes me wonder how many conflicts could be avoided if people simply asked, "How do you prefer to receive feedback?" I've also noticed how formality versus informality affects perception. Some people expect professional, structured communication at work, emails with proper greetings, meetings with clear agendas. Others take a more casual approach, seeing work interactions as extensions of natural conversation. I've seen tension arise when a formal communicator thinks an informal one is unprofessional, while the informal communicator thinks the formal one is too rigid. What if neither is wrong? Could it be that understanding someone's preferred style is more important than the style itself? At the heart of it, I keep coming back to the idea that most communication problems aren't really about the words themselves. They're about how those words are framed, delivered, and interpreted. What if, instead of assuming someone is being unclear, rude, or overly sensitive, we got curious? What if we asked, how does this person naturally express themselves? Could it be that the secret to better communication isn't about changing people, but about learning to hear them differently? The importance of vocabulary. Have you ever been in a conversation where both people think they're on the same page, but somehow the meaning keeps slipping? I've noticed that it's not just what we say, but the specific words we choose that shape understanding. Could it be that a single unclear word is enough to derail an entire discussion? I've seen moments where someone says, "Let's get this done quickly," and one person hears, "Drop everything and finish this now," while another hears, "Whenever you have time." It makes me wonder how much frustration comes not from disagreement, but from words that leave too much room for interpretation. I've noticed that people often assume their meaning is obvious, forgetting that words can be loaded with personal associations. Take the word urgent. To one person, it means absolutely must be done immediately, while to another, it just means higher on the list. And then there's soon, one of the most misleading words I've seen in professional settings. Does soon mean in an hour, by the end of the day, next week? I've learned that when things feel vague, the best question to ask is, what exactly do you mean by that? Could it be that clear communication is just a matter of making invisible assumptions visible? And then there's the issue of overcomplicated language. Have you ever listened to someone explain something in a way that felt unnecessarily complex? I've seen people use jargon or technical terms thinking it makes them sound knowledgeable, but all it really does is create confusion. On the other hand, some people oversimplify, assuming that a broad statement is enough when more details are actually needed. Could it be that the best communicators aren't the ones with the biggest vocabulary, but the ones who know when to simplify and when to be precise? I've also noticed that certain words trigger emotional responses without us realizing it. Saying you made a mistake often puts people on the defensive, while there's an issue we need to fix keeps the conversation neutral. Even small shifts, like saying I suggest instead of you should, can change how a message is received. Could it be that most resistance in conversations isn't about the request itself, but about how the words make people feel? And then there's the way people interpret the weight of words differently. Some people take everything literally, assuming words mean exactly what they say, while others look for hidden meaning or subtext. I've seen conversations go sideways just because one person expected directness while the other expected implication. One says, "It would be great if we could wrap this up today," thinking they've made a clear request, while the other hears it as a casual suggestion. What if people asked, are they being literal, or do they expect me to read between the lines? Could it be that so many communication breakdowns happen simply because people expect words to carry the same weight for everyone? The more I think about it, the more I realize that choosing words carefully isn't about being overly cautious. It's about making things easier for everyone involved. What if instead of assuming people understand us, we checked in? What if we asked, is this clear? Or what do you think this means? Could it be that the secret to effortless conversations isn't saying more, but saying the right things in the right way? Managing emotional triggers in conversations. Have you ever walked into a conversation feeling perfectly calm, only to find yourself suddenly irritated, defensive, or even completely shut down? I've noticed that it's not always the words themselves that trigger a reaction, but the way they hit something deeper, something personal. Could it be that most difficult conversations aren't actually about what's being said, but about what those words awaken in us? I've seen situations where a simple phrase like, why did you do it this way, is taken as a genuine question by one person and a criticism by another. It makes me wonder, how often do we react, not to what's actually happening, but to an old pattern we don't even realize we're carrying? What fascinates me is how different people respond to the same emotional triggers in completely opposite ways. Some get louder and more forceful, while others shut down completely. I've noticed that when someone is triggered, their ability to listen drops dramatically. Could it be that most miscommunications happen not because people don't understand each other, but because once emotions take over, understanding isn't even possible? I've found that when emotions flare up, pausing, even for just a few seconds, can completely change the outcome of a conversation. What if, instead of reacting instantly, we asked ourselves, what am I actually feeling right now, before saying anything at all? Then there's the challenge of tone and body language, the invisible layer of communication that often triggers a reaction before the actual words are even processed. I've seen people insist, I didn't mean it that way, but by then the damage is already done. A neutral sentence like we need to talk can feel completely different depending on whether it's spoken calmly or with tension in the voice. And then there's body language, crossed arms, an eyebrow raise, or a deep sigh. Tiny signals that can shift an entire conversation. Could it be that what we don't say plays a bigger role in emotional triggers than we realize? I've also noticed that expectations shape emotional responses more than anything else. If someone expects a conversation to be difficult, they walk in already prepared for conflict. If they assume the other person won't listen, they approach it with frustration before a single word is spoken. It makes me wonder, how much of what we experience in a conversation is based on what's actually happening, and how much is based on what we were already expecting to feel? What if, before a conversation, we paused and asked, what if this goes better than I think? Could shifting expectations be the simplest way to shift the outcome? And then there's the issue of taking things personally. I've seen people get upset at things that were never meant to be hurtful, simply because it touched an insecurity or past experience. One person says, "This report needs a few changes," and the other hears, "You did a bad job." Someone offers a suggestion, and instead of seeing it as helpful, it feels like criticism. Could it be that most emotional triggers have nothing to do with the current conversation at all? What if the real key to managing emotional responses is not controlling what others say, but learning to recognize what is actually about us and what isn't? The more I think about it, the more I realize that conversations only feel out of control when our emotions are in control. What if, instead of focusing on what the other person is doing, we got curious about our own reactions? What if, before responding, we asked, "What is this really about for me?" Could it be that the easiest way to navigate difficult conversations isn't about avoiding emotional triggers, but about understanding them before they take over? Cultural differences in communication. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and walked away feeling like something was just off? I've noticed that sometimes it's not a difference in opinion causing misalignment, but a difference in cultural communication styles. Could it be that the way we speak, interpret, and respond isn't just personal, but deeply shaped by where we come from? I've seen people assume that someone is being cold and distant, when really they're just from a culture that values formality and restraint in professional settings. On the other hand, I've seen people mistake warmth and friendliness for a lack of seriousness, simply because their culture equates professionalism with a more structured approach. It makes me wonder, how many workplace misunderstandings have nothing to do with intent and everything to do with unspoken cultural norms? One of the biggest cultural differences I've noticed is in direct versus indirect communication. Some cultures value straightforwardness, where saying exactly what you mean is a sign of honesty and efficiency. Others prefer a more nuanced approach, where being too blunt can be seen as rude or confrontational. I've seen people from direct cultures get frustrated, thinking, why won't they just say what they mean? While those from indirect cultures wonder, why are they being so harsh? Could it be that neither approach is wrong, just different ways of maintaining respect and clarity within a specific cultural context? Then there's the issue of silence in conversations. In some cultures, silence means discomfort or disinterest, a sign that something is wrong or that the other person has nothing to say. But in others, silence is a sign of thoughtfulness and respect, a way to process before responding. I've seen people rush to fill the silence, worried that the conversation isn't going well, when really, the other person is just carefully considering their words. Could it be that understanding silence is just as important as understanding speech? What if, instead of assuming what silence means, we simply asked, are they pausing to think, or do they need encouragement to speak? Another major difference I've noticed is in hierarchy and authority in communication. In some cultures, questioning a boss or speaking up in a meeting is encouraged. It's seen as a sign of engagement and confidence. In others, challenging authority, even politely, can come across as disrespectful or inappropriate. I've seen highly skilled professionals stay quiet in meetings, not because they have nothing to contribute, but because their cultural background has taught them to wait for direct permission to speak. Could it be that people aren't always shy or disengaged, but just following a communication style that feels natural to them? What if the key to more inclusive discussions is simply recognizing that not everyone feels comfortable jumping into the conversation the same way? And then there's the concept of small talk. In some cultures, getting straight to the point is the most efficient way to communicate. In others, small talk, asking about family, weekend plans, or even the weather, is an essential part of building trust before getting to business. I've seen people feel impatient when a meeting starts with casual conversation, assuming it's wasting time, while others feel uneasy when a conversation jumps straight to work without any warm-up. Could it be that small talk isn't just about being social, but about establishing connection in a way that feels comfortable based on cultural norms? The more I think about it, the more I realize that cultural differences in communication aren't obstacles. They're just different roadmaps for navigating human interaction. What if, instead of expecting everyone to communicate the way we do, we got curious? What if we asked, how does this person's background shape the way they approach conversations? Could it be that the secret to bridging communication gaps isn't about speaking louder or explaining more, but about learning to listen through a different lens?